Sego. Hi everyone, my name's Melissa Johns and I'm Ngāti Toa or Mohawk Turtle Clan and French Canadian. I'm the digital and interactive lead at imagineNATIVE and I'm very excited to share this series of artist talks with you with support from CBC. You can catch these artist talks live throughout the week and any you miss you can find on our YouTube channel the day after the festival. You can also check out all of the works being discussed in these talks for free at the In Digital space if you followed the link on your screen. Now in for tuning in and enjoy!
Ani, Bojo, and welcome everyone to Crafting a VR Epic, The Great Change with Whakakitenga. My name is Caitlin Tomaselli. I am the Digital and Interactive Coordinator at imagineNATIVE Film and Media Arts Festival. I come from Shishigwaning First Nation, which is located on Manitoulin Island. I'm currently residing in Toronto. We at imagineNATIVE acknowledge that this land located on present-day Toronto is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We acknowledge the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty whose spirit is one based in collective stewardship and reciprocity. We take the spirit of this covenant to the core of our operations as we bring artists and audiences from many nations across the globe together through our various initiatives and activities. Please take a moment to think of the land you currently reside upon, wherever you may be, and acknowledge those who went before and those yet to come. Well, I'm incredibly excited to introduce the creators of Whakakitenga, Wiremu Grace, Miriam Ross, and Paul Wolffram. Wiremu is a filmmaker whose work is heavily influenced by the upbringing he had on the traditional whenua of his ancestors. He has extensively worked in visual arts, stage, radio, new media, television, and film. Miriam Ross is a creative arts researcher whose work with new digital cinema technologies with experimental films that have been screened internationally. And Paul Wolffram is a filmmaker and ethnographer who has won international awards for cross-cultural engagement and collaborative filmmaking in the Pacific.
Tēnā koutou, tuatai ake ka tika kia mihi kawatu kia koutou, ngā iwi take, o tō koutou whenua, tēnei te mihi mai konei, mai Aotearoa taino atu kia koutou, tēnei ngā mihi mai oha kia koutou, ki o koutou maunga, awa, whenua, iwi, nei ranga mihi mai Aotearoa kia koutou katoa, nō rea tēnā koutou, tēnā hui tātou, kia ora.
So we're going to jump right into the first question, and you all share a background that mixes film and education. How did the three of you come together in the first place?
Should we do the long story?
Do the short one.
The short one would be that Victoria University of Wellington provided Paul and I with some funding to work on a new VR project. And we reached out to the local iwi, as Ngāti Toa, about doing a VR project, looking back into the past and thinking about the effects of colonization. And they suggested we should work with one of their really great writers and directors, Wiremu. And so that brought the three of us together on this one project.
Quite a big topic, as you can imagine. So I think the idea and the opportunity to have to explore colonization from our perspective as tangata whenua, as people of the land, then to be able to look through that lens from our own perspective was quite a big opportunity. So I think in those first initial meetings, you know, like we came with different ideas, different perspectives, and then through talking over coffee backwards and forwards, we started to shape something of a pathway. And then it was us going on to land, because that was really important for me to be able to take to people who I didn't know at that stage. And I think it was that time that I was actually sussing out where you fellas were coming from, you know, because you don't jump into those sort of things easily. When we're talking about story, these stories have to have the integrity and the connection to land. If I feel a little uneasy about whether that's going to work or the relationship's going to work, then I'm not going to do it. And I was glad that, you know, that in those first initial times that our dialogue was open.
We really appreciated that you had an idea that you wanted to do something around mana. It was very place-based, a lot of those initial discussions. And we got that sense of why this land is so important.
And it's talking about relationships. For us as Ngāti Toa, we're always talking about our relationship with the land, relationship with each other, And for me, I'm always trying to find or weave threads of relationships so that these can feed back into the generations that are coming, because otherwise, why am I doing this? From my own perspective, always consider, what am I putting out there? What threads am I bringing together, and how will those threads of relationship and story travel into the future? Those initial meetings were really good, and they're really important. And I think that relationship building, they were a foundation of a good relationship that went right through, I think.
The overall experience is incredible, from the soundtrack to the aesthetic. So as far as VR goes, it's incredibly cinematic. Where did the original premise come from, and what does Whakakitenga mean?
Te Rangihaeata is an ancestor of ours. As I was saying, threading back into our own past and thinking about colonization, the effects of colonization on our own people. I've already heard this story of our people and how the colonials impacted us, us being a people who are grounded in a place that is by the sea, but also quite a strategic place that the colonizers really wanted to have a piece of, and they wanted to put roads through and develop in terms of shipping and things like that. So I'd heard these stories, and I'd heard of main characters of the past, like Governor Grey, for example, who was the governor of the time, who had the militia, the forces and things staged in Wellington, which is our main city, and where we are is Porirua, which is about 25 k's out of the main city. So this island sits off the coast. It's called Mana Island, Te Mano Kupeke Aotearoa. And our tupuna stayed on that island, and there was a lot of pressure on our people, on our rangatira, to open up roads and sign over land. So he knew that things were coming to a head, and this was the early 1800s. The imaginings that I brought in the world of our ancestors, we think about the spiritual connection, the land connection, the people connection, the rivers and the moana and these sorts of things. And then so I started to bring in the story really in my dreams and in my imaginings about our ancestor, and that's where the seed of it started, I think.
It was really important. It was going to be a very cinematic project, but it was going to have that visual aesthetic, and that aligned quite well, I think, with your background in screen as well.
And my beginning was more about the encounter, really. I was interested in the way that VR could recast that encounter as a different sort of encounter from an Indigenous perspective. But when Wiremu started to talk about Te Rangihaeata, and from my perspective, it was very easy. Then it was just conversations then about ways in which we could tell the story.
It was like a decolonization in itself, because we're talking about layers of story, but we're also talking about the way that we are able to express in this modern day context. I'd never done a VR project before in my life, so this was all new to me. It was a new technology. I had to learn about how you can tell the story in that VR. There was a lot of layers of relationship building and understanding that had to come along the way.
It might be worth mentioning that we were very lucky to work with John Strang and Hayden Steeman from Dust Company, who are really the experts in this technology in terms of, they work with Unreal Engine. They're just incredible. But I think they really appreciated that there was that continuous back and forth about understanding the cultural elements and the kind of things that they relied a lot on you for really making sure the details were correct at kind of visual level.
And with that, how long did that take? How long was the process?
We initially kind of formalized the relationship with Ngāti Toa, which was iwi, in early 2019. And then, we worked all the way through. I mean, we came officially on board around about June of 2019. So we had the kind of beginnings of the project the first half of that year, and then from about June 2019 through really till March 2020, which is when we had it ready for the film festival Māoriland, which sadly, because of COVID-19, wasn't able to fully operate. So that came from just under a year was the kind of the bulk of the main work.
The Haka chants were especially powerful in this work. And so is everything purely traditional, and what was like to bring it back to your family and your home or your community as a guide to help with this experience?
Pretty fantastic, actually, because the technology is pretty out there for, like our old people, our kaumātua, to see them and what their interaction was and their reactions. We had seats around the big rooms. Some of the older people especially couldn't stand up and do it because it was just a bit too freaky, so we put them on swivel chairs. But then you had the little ones, when they put it on, they'd be crawling around the floor, and quite an emotional response for some because they know the characters, they know the story, they have a deeper connection to what that story means. There was quite some emotional sort of responses. Overall, I think the technology is very new to a lot of our people. It's more the connection of the story to us as a people. Whakakitenga, it can mean the word vision, but it could also mean visionary. It could mean seeing into the future. So there's kind of a double play on the meaning. Really, it came to me quite easily when it landed. This was sometime into the project. The word whakakitenga comes from our whare tupuna, so it comes from our traditional meeting house, and it's one of the rafters in our meeting house that's painted. And the paintings are of whaitere or stingrays. And the stingrays representing vision, like looking into the future, being able to see into the future, being able to choose pathways into the future. It landed quite easily for me what the name was sometime after. There's connection there and a lot of really good response from our people.
And in terms of the traditional aspects, the haka is obviously one that's very important to iwi, but also the actual details. You spent a lot of time on getting those right, but I think we've had conversations about how it's also impossible to know exactly, how things were in that era.
Yeah, that's right. That was really one of the biggest challenges. How can we hold on to emotional thread using this technology? Because I'm really used to telling things in the flat screen thing. What do they call it these days?
2D.
2D. Yeah, so there was the challenge of the technology. There was the conversations expressing why I don't want kopa being the owl. I didn't want kopa sitting on the credits in the beginning because I thought, no, that feels too Disney. This is a spiritual bird, and that spiritual bird is taking us on a journey. We are not looking at that spiritual bird and having an equal standing. We as the people are taken by that bird on the journey, and the emotional connection to that spirit needed to be understood. Emotional thread first, technology second, So that was something that we talked about quite a lot.
Well, that's amazing. Was there any opportunities at all to bring any community on set at all?
Because there's no live action filming, there wasn't a set per se, but we did motion capture. So it was Wiremu's mostly family members that came to play the roles for the motion capture. And it's actually Wiremu himself who is Te Rangihaeata, which wasn't the original plan. It was the most appropriate in the moment.
And we recorded the taongaporo, the instruments and the soundtrack. Tamihana, came along, and he's an expert from Ngāti Toa on taongaporo, the traditional instruments of Māori. And he played a whole lot of different instruments for us over about 4 or 5 hours, and we did some combinations, and we used those sound beds as a way to construct the sound design of the piece.
The experience of putting on the suits and doing the acting and all that, it was quite a that was pretty mind-blowing actually, because I've never done that sort of thing before. I've seen Peter Jackson do it, I've seen whatever Weta and all that. That was quite cool to see yourself up on the screen, and then also doing the sound recording in a booth and having your face in the motion capture was pretty cool.
He kept saying, no, bulk him up, make him more muscly.
He's not a vegetarian.
Yeah. People would talk about Te Rangihaeata as being really huge, and so maybe
7 foot.
Maybe that's the sort of thing. So maybe his physical bulk was bigger, and he obviously left an impression as a man.
Well, what a new exciting experience that was for you, Wiremu, and for your family as well. So some of the aesthetics elements are incredibly realistic, and others have like a painterly feel, such as the sky and the vision sequence. And how did you strike the balance between that?
That was interesting because a lot of our initial conversations about the technology was going to work out what route we would take, because we were quite open at the beginning that we might have even gone down the 360 degree live action filming, which obviously would have been very realist. Or would we have gone down a much more animated style? And I think that was part of the process, particularly with John Strand from Dusk, was trying to work out where this balance would be, to try and make it fully immersive, but also not tip into that uncanny valley of almost being completely photorealistic. So this was a bit of a balance that allowed us to pull back a little bit, to have that kind of painterly quality. So we wouldn't go near uncanny valley, but we would still.
What's uncanny valley?
Uncanny valley is when it gets almost so real and it feels weird. So especially with people, so uncanny. Sorry, my scholarly hat on.
But, so you kind of want to either go fully real or pull back a bit. And I guess our kind of painterly techniques really helped us to, you know.
Yeah, and we're so lucky to work with John, because he brought such confidence because of his artistic ability and rendering the whole world. Every time we'd see stuff, we were quite blown away, and the different builds that came through. He kept on apologizing in the early stage about how it needed to be improved, and it wasn't there yet. But every stage we looked at, we could see where it was going, and how much skill John Strang brought to the animation was just incredible.
Let's put a lot more effort into the detail of his moko, for example, of his physical, the face tattoos on his legs, on his costume. I mean, we did a lot of research into the costume. We went to our museums and we talked to experts about weaponry and all that sort of thing. So I was saying, let's spend, if we can, as much of our money, time, energy on that character. We can afford to be able to pull back on the other sides, because this is the emotional story that we're going to hold on to. This is where we want to be.
Can you explain the elements of the glowing guy?
It was quite early in the script development, and you had the idea that he would see the visions, but then he would kind of come out of his body.
Yeah, that's right. Being, a people very much based in spirituality and connection to wairuatanga or spirituality, to animal figures, and to, we've got to keep thinking that in those days they didn't think like us. They didn't think in terms of the world, and in the world view was a completely different thing. So I had to keep remembering really that this is a whole nother way to see things. So that's how they made decisions. That's how they got led into the world. Te Rangihaeata, I believe, what I heard about him was that he's a very visionary person. So he knew that this was coming. To have kopa come, that bird come to him, he knew something was up, and that led into that scene in the whare where that vision was born. And that karakia, that incantation that he's saying, he is saying, let my eye open, let my mind open up so that I can receive this vision.
As I'm sure you're aware that there are a lot of misconceptions about indigeneity that stem from historical depictions in media, often by creators who don't share our cultures. You've chosen to specifically focus on a pre-colonial area. So I wanted to ask, what does visual sovereignty mean to you, and in a Maori context? In
this day and age, we kind of compartmentalize things and say, this is this, this is that, this is that, this is that. But actually, it's all joined together. So when I think about visual sovereignty, I think about food sovereignty, I think about land sovereignty, I think about our people and how we are tied to systems that don't serve us, So when I think about storytelling, I'm always thinking about the threads of story that weave us as a stronger people into the future. Our ancestors, they gave us pathways, and it's up to us to be reconnecting ourselves to those pathways and not being caught up in distractions of a culture that doesn't really serve our beginnings. You can't talk about that island without talking about that sea. You can't talk about that island without talking about the journey of our ancestors from the Pacific, because all of it is connected, and we've got to keep thinking, in my opinion, about the connections and relationships, and the connections and relationships of land to sea, to air, to bush, to birds, to insects, to everything else. And then perhaps we can start thinking about the relationships that we forge as human beings in this story of creation, rather than thinking that we are the center of that and that everything else comes from that. See, there's a different way to see the world, there's a different way to be in the world.
Well, that was a beautiful explanation from you, Wiremu. And for the closing shot of Whakakitenga, it features a contemporary team with a waka canoe paddling away from the island. So it's a strong image, and especially as they chant the haka. What do you want viewers to take away from that moment?
There's hope. There's hope, and there are, like I was saying just then, there are seeds that are planted in our young people that will take us into the future. So we really wanted to show that clearly. I'm glad that it has come across like that, because I was going, well, do we need to bring the music up? You would have some bells and whistles to go with it, but I'm glad that that's come across.
Yeah, we discussed many different ways of how to get there in the end.
Yeah,
commanding their own direction and heading off, into the future. Yeah, into the future. Simple, but quite a nice way of rounding up with. We didn't want to end in that sort of dark vision place.
We wanted to come to the hope, We really did.
It's a nice scene that I think resonates for different audiences, because this comes back to your kind of sovereignty, where Ngāti Toa and other Māori audiences can see themselves in that scene, that they're leading the scene, but other people can watch it and think this still gives us a vision of the future.
And we wanted Wahine Māori, like Māori women, to be leading it, because they are the leaders, and we've got a very strong connection and tradition of matriarchy. So, we needed to be recognising that. We wanted to finish with Māori women, young women, leading us into the future.
You also decided to dedicate this work to Brian Gunson. Can you explain a little bit about him?
Brian Gunson is my uncle, so he's my mum's brother. And my mum's a writer. My uncle was an artist. He died recently last year, about a year ago. So it was around that time when we were creating this. And he was a very big influence. He was, as I said, I was talking about the rafters in our whare, he was the painter of those. And he was a very strong influence on us as kids, to, always being around an artist, always being around a musician. So yeah, it was because of that I thought it would be appropriate to dedicate it to him. They're doing an exhibition of his work at our local gallery. They were really, really pleased that that acknowledgement was there for our uncle. But when we took it home to our own people, they were also really wrapped, because he had such a big influence on us as kids. His story continues to be told.
Aww. Well, and lastly, what can we expect from you in the future?
We're working on a new project. There's another virtual reality project. It's about atua, so it's about Māori connection to atuatanga, which means connection to the environment, more or less. Who knows what the future is? This is now, right? So what's it going to be in 10 years? And then how's this going to translate? How can we express our stories with this medium in ways that really connect our young people to old story, because that is a challenge. It's always a challenge. What are the ways that we can use media to reconnect? It's a hard one, because, with COVID, everything just becomes uncertain, and it's like, this virtual reality medium, I'm lucky we're being able to still carry on with a lot of work, because you can do a lot of it remotely. So
I hope everybody enjoys the Whakakitenga. It was pretty great making it. We were able to work with, you have such good understandings of narrative that it really came through, and that was always the challenge for me, trying to craft narrative together. But you've got such a good understanding of this, Wiremu, that it was so easy this time. And I think the narrative is so original and it's so suited to the medium that it's really great.
We're sad that we couldn't come physically to imagineNATIVE. maybe next time, hopefully.
Very thankful to imagineNATIVE for accepting our story into your festival. So very grateful for that. And with the hope that those who view it will see themselves, see their own stories, and perhaps have that reflection on their own experiences of colonisation or of connection. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Well, it's an honor to present Whakakitenga at our festival this year. For everyone watching, be sure to check out this incredible work for free in our Indigenous space this year.
Nyawen, thank you Wiremu, Miriam, and Paul for reaching out across the world to talk to us today. Be sure to check out Whakakitenga on the Indigenous space this week. Tomorrow we have 2 special events for you to check out. Pixels and Poetry with Hex Faye at 1 p.m. and Social VR Kanatei, which is a multiplayer social VR experience, at 2 p.m. You do not want to miss these events, so be sure to tune in. Nyawen and Onigi!